Mall manager throws out woman with Kamala shirt, not knowing she's the owner. Will the owner punish the mall manager? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. The mall buzzed with the usual Saturday afternoon energy. Families strolling between stores, kids laughing as they ran past kiosks, and teenagers chatting excitedly in clusters. Shoppers carried bags from big brands, their footsteps echoing off the polished tiles beneath their feet. Tina walked casually among them, her expression calm as she browsed through the window displays. She wore jeans, sneakers, and a simple white t-shirt with Kamala Harris printed boldly in red and blue letters. Nothing about her appearance screamed trouble, and yet she had felt the shift in energy the moment she stepped into the mall. It started with lingering looks, whispers, the kind of quiet judgment Tina knew all too well. She ignored it, moving with purpose as she passed by one store after another. The shirt wasn't a statement to her, it was simply her right to wear what she wanted. She had bought it at a political rally 2 years earlier and threw it on without a second thought that morning. But apparently some people thought otherwise. The trouble began near the food court. "Ma'am," a sharp voice called out. Tina turned slowly, her eyebrows raised as two uniformed mall security guards approached her. They were both tall, white men in crisp light blue shirts and dark pants, their radios crackling softly at their waists. Behind them, a man in his late 40s followed, his gait stiff and deliberate. His name badge gleamed on his chest, Manager, M.R. Dunbar. Tina crossed her arms, watching the three men approach. "Can I help you?" she asked evenly. Mr. Dunbar's face twisted into something between irritation and forced politeness. "Yes, actually. We've had complaints about you," he said, his tone clipped. "You're disturbing shoppers." Tina frowned. "Complaints? About what?" "About your attire?" Dunbar gestured toward her shirt, as though it were evidence in a courtroom. "This is a family-friendly establishment, and we don't allow disruptive behavior or inappropriate messaging." Tina blinked, stunned for a moment. Then a wry smile tugged at her lips. "My shirt is inappropriate?" "It's political," Dunbar shot back. "And it's making some of our shoppers uncomfortable." Tina tilted her head, the smile fading. "So let me get this straight. I'm walking through my mall, minding my own business, and because some people don't like my shirt, you're asking me to leave?" One of the guards shifted uncomfortably. "We're just following protocol, ma'am." Tina turned her gaze to him, her expression sharp. "What protocol is that? No political shirts allowed?" "Because I passed at least 3 people wearing baseball caps with logos on them, and no one seemed bothered by that." Dunbar's face flushed slightly, but he stood his ground. "Those are different. This is causing a scene." "A scene?" Tina glanced around. A small crowd of curious shoppers had begun to gather nearby, their phones already out, recording the exchange. "You're the one stopping me in public and causing a scene." Dunbar stiffened, clearly aware of the growing audience. "Ma'am, if you refuse to cooperate, we'll have no choice but to escort you out of the building." Tina took a step closer, her voice calm but firm. "Let me ask you something, Mr. Dunbar. Would you be having this conversation with me if I were wearing a shirt that said Tom Brady 12 or Love Thy Neighbor?" "That's not the same thing," Dunbar snapped. "It's exactly the same thing," Tina countered. "You just don't like what my shirt says, and that's not my problem. It's yours." One of the security guards shifted uncomfortably again, clearly uncertain. But Dunbar had no intention of backing down. He glanced at the crowd and then barked, "Enough of this nonsense. You need to leave. Now." Tina looked at him for a long moment, her gaze steady and unreadable. She uncrossed her arms and took a small step back. "Fine," she said simply. Dunbar blinked, thrown off by her sudden compliance. "Fine?" Tina nodded, glancing at the onlookers with a faint smile. "I'll leave. But you might want to call the owner of this mall first. I think they'd like to know how you treat paying customers." Dunbar's face darkened, and he let out a humorless laugh. "You think I'm going to waste the owner's time with this nonsense? I know what I'm doing." Tina shrugged, adjusting the strap of her bag over her shoulder. "Your call?" "Escort her out," Dunbar ordered the guards, his voice tight with frustration. "Now." The 2 guards flanked Tina as they walked toward the main entrance of the mall, their presence unnecessarily imposing. Tina didn't resist, her steps even and deliberate, her expression calm. Shoppers stopped to watch, whispering to one another and recording the entire scene. The buzz of their murmurs echoed through the high ceilings like a low hum. "Can you believe this?" someone whispered. "She's not even doing anything wrong. This is embarrassing." Tina didn't let the humiliation touch her. She walked with purpose, her head held high, her Kamala Harris shirt as bold and unyielding as her posture. The guards, on the other hand, looked uncomfortable, their confidence faltering with every step. They could feel the weight of the crowd's judgment on their backs. When they reached the glass double doors at the front of the mall, one of the guards stepped forward to open them. Tina paused just inside the threshold, turning back to look at Mr. Dunbar, who had followed them to the entrance, his chest puffed out like a rooster. "You've made your point," he said, his tone patronizing. "Next time, leave the politics at home." Tina's lips curved into a small smile, though there was no warmth in it. "Oh, don't worry. I'll be back sooner than you think." With that, she stepped out into the sunlight, the glass doors sliding shut behind her. Inside, Dunbar let out a sharp breath, adjusting the cuffs of his shirt as he turned back toward the food court. "Unbelievable," he muttered to himself, shaking his head. "The nerve of some people." One of the security guards lingered behind, watching Tina disappear into the parking lot before hesitantly speaking up. "Sir, are you sure that was the right move? She didn't really do anything." Dunbar waved him off. "It doesn't matter. People were uncomfortable, and it's my job to make sure this place runs smoothly. You think the owner would want someone like that walking around? Causing a scene? Absolutely not." The guard opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, a frantic voice called out behind them. "Mr. Dunbar." A young woman in a neatly pressed blazer and name tag hurried over, her expression panicked. It was Molly, one of the assistant managers. She stopped in front of Dunbar, breathless. "Mr. Dunbar, you just made a huge mistake." Dunbar frowned. "What are you talking about?" "That woman," Molly said, gesturing toward the exit. "The one you just threw out. She's Tina Reynolds." Dunbar blinked, the name not registering. "Who?" Molly's eyes widened. "Tina Reynolds, the owner of this mall. She's the majority shareholder of this property. She owns everything." For a moment, Dunbar simply stared at her, his expression blank as though he hadn't heard her correctly. Then, slowly, the color drained from his face. "You're joking," he said hoarsely. "I'm not," Molly said, shaking her head. "She's been the owner for over a year. She doesn't make public appearances often, but we've all seen her photo in the corporate updates. That was her." Dunbar felt as though the air had been knocked from his lungs. He looked back toward the entrance where Tina had disappeared, his stomach twisting with dread. The quiet murmurs of the crowd around him grew louder, a mix of confusion and judgment. "She's the owner?" one of the guards said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Molly replied sharply. "And you just humiliated her in front of everyone?" Dunbar swayed slightly as though his legs might give out beneath him. He suddenly became aware of the phone still recording, the curious eyes of shoppers watching his every move. A bead of sweat rolled down the side of his face. "Oh my God," he muttered. "What have I done?" The air in the mall had shifted. Mr. Dunbar felt it immediately, like an unseen weight pressing down on his chest. He could still hear the murmurs, the judgmental whispers from the crowd who had witnessed his exchange with the woman. And now that he knew who she was, the realization hit him like a punch to the gut. He turned sharply toward Molly, his voice a low, panicked hiss. "You're absolutely sure?" "Yes," Molly insisted, pulling her phone from her pocket. She quickly tapped the screen, then thrust it toward him. "Here, look at this. That's Tina Reynolds. That's her photo in the shareholder emails. The owner." Dunbar stared at the image on the screen, his face pale. It was unmistakable. The woman in the picture, the same calm, confident expression, the same determined gaze, was the very woman he'd humiliated and thrown out moments earlier. His stomach twisted. "I didn't know." "Well, you do now," Molly said sharply, snapping her phone shut. "And I think she's going to want to speak to you. I hope you've got a good explanation." Dunbar swallowed hard, a cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. Around him, the crowd hadn't dispersed. Shoppers still lingered, their phones out, whispering to one another as they watched him squirm. Every step he took toward his office felt like wading through quicksand, the weight of what he'd done dragging him down. Outside the mall, Tina sat calmly in her car, the engine idling as she stared through the windshield. Her phone buzzed on the seat beside her. Messages pouring in from friends and employees who had already seen the videos spreading online. Apparently, the confrontation had gone viral and it was moving fast. Tina Reynolds humiliated at her own mall. Owner mistaken for a troublemaker. Mall manager oversteps. Tina's lips curled into a faint, knowing smile. The world had a funny way of revealing people's true colors when they thought no one was watching. Mr. Dunbar wasn't the first person to underestimate her, and she doubted he would be the last. She glanced down at the phone again. A message from one of her senior partners flashed across the screen. "Are you okay? Do you want us to handle this?" Tina's fingers hovered over the screen as she considered the offer. But then she shook her head, her smile widening. "No," she muttered to herself. "I'll handle it." With that, she grabbed her keys, opened the car door and stepped back into the mall. Mr. Dunbar paced nervously in his office, his fingers tapping anxiously against the edge of his desk. The blinds were closed, but he could still hear the buzz of the shoppers outside. People were talking, watching, waiting for something to happen. His heart nearly stopped when his phone rang. He snatched it up, his voice trembling. "Hello? Mr. Dunbar." The voice on the other end was smooth, calm, and unmistakable. It was Tina Reynolds. Dunbar froze, the phone suddenly slippery in his hand. "Ms. Reynolds? I didn't know." "Save it," Tina interrupted, her voice cool and clipped. "I'm in my mall and I'd like to speak with you. Meet me in the atrium." "You've got 5 minutes?" The line went dead. Dunbar stared at the phone, his mouth suddenly dry. For a long moment he couldn't move. Then, snapping out of his daze, he grabbed his jacket and bolted out of the office. The atrium was packed when Dunbar arrived, his heart hammering against his ribs. Shoppers had gathered near the center of the mall, where Tina stood waiting, calm and composed, her Kamala Harris shirt even more prominent now under the bright overhead lights. Dunbar's steps slowed as he approached, his face pale and his posture slouched. Every eye in the atrium turned toward him, and the whispers grew louder. Tina looked up as he neared, her expression unreadable. She folded her arms across her chest, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "Mr. Dunbar," she said, her voice carrying through the atrium with quiet authority. "Nice of you to join me." Dunbar stopped a few feet in front of her, suddenly very aware of the crowd forming around them. "Ms. Reynolds," he said, his voice strained. You didn't recognize me," Tina said simply, cutting him off. "I get it. People don't usually think the owner of a multi-million-dollar property would walk around in jeans and a t-shirt, minding her own business." The crowd gasped quietly, their eyes darting between Dunbar and Tina as the weight of her words sank in. "You're the owner?" a shopper whispered. "Yes," Tina replied, her gaze never leaving Dunbar. "I am. And today I was treated the way far too many people are treated, because of assumptions, bias, and judgment." Dunbar's face turned bright red, sweat beading at his temples. "Ms. Reynolds, I didn't know." "You didn't bother to know," Tina interrupted sharply, her voice firm but calm. "You saw a shirt. You made assumptions. And you used your position to humiliate someone who had every right to be here." The crowd murmured in agreement, their whispers growing louder. Some held their phones up, recording every word. "This mall," Tina continued, gesturing to the space around her, "is a place where everyone, no matter who they are, what they look like, or what they believe, should feel welcome. That's the kind of business I run, and that's the kind of space I own." Dunbar opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He looked like a man drowning, desperate for a lifeline. Tina stepped closer, her gaze steady. "You embarrassed yourself today, Mr. Dunbar." "Not me. I don't need an apology because what you did says far more about you than it does about me." The crowd erupted into quiet applause, the sound growing louder as more people joined in. Dunbar's shoulders slumped, his face ashen. He looked around helplessly, but there was nowhere to hide. Tina turned toward the crowd, raising a hand to quiet them. "This isn't just about me," she said, her voice clear. "It's about respect. About treating people with dignity regardless of appearances. Everyone deserves that, not just the people you think aren't acceptable." The applause swelled again, this time louder and more sustained. Tina glanced back at Dunbar, who stood frozen, shame written all over his face. "Mr. Dunbar," she said, her voice quieter now, "I suggest you take some time to reflect on whether you belong in a position of leadership. Because in my mall, we hold people to a higher standard than what you showed today." With that, Tina turned and walked away, leaving Dunbar standing there as the crowd erupted into cheers. By the time Tina reached her car, her phone was buzzing non-stop. Messages poured in, some from friends congratulating her for standing up for herself, others from employees promising to ensure the mall's policies reflected the values she'd spoken about. Ethan, one of her most trusted colleagues, sent a short, to-the-point message. "Well handled. Dunbar's resignation letter will be on your desk by morning." Tina smiled faintly, tossing the phone onto the passenger seat as she climbed behind the wheel. She didn't relish humiliating anyone, not even Dunbar, but some lessons had to be taught the hard way. As she pulled out of the parking lot, she glanced up at the mall one last time. The sun was beginning to set, casting golden light across the glass facade. It was just a building to some people, but to Tina, it was a symbol, a reminder of everything she'd worked for and everything she stood for. She pressed her hand against the steering wheel, her Kamala Harris shirt still bright against her chest. Never judge a book by its cover, she murmured to herself, a small smile tugging at her lips. You just might embarrass yourself. The mall buzzed with energy long after Tina left. Whispers filled the halls, spreading like wildfire from store to store, kiosk to kiosk. Everyone seemed to know what had happened. The woman who was humiliated for wearing a political t-shirt turned out to be the very owner of the mall. Videos of the confrontation had already gone viral, filling social media with clips of Mr. Dunbar's red face and Tina's calm, cutting words. Back in his office, Mr. Dunbar sat slumped at his desk, staring blankly at the screen of his computer. His phone sat nearby, vibrating constantly with calls and messages, none of which he dared to answer. Every notification was a new reminder of how badly he had failed. Mall manager humiliates owner in shocking video. Owner teaches lesson on respect after being thrown out of her own mall. Dignity speaks louder. Woman in Kamala shirt is the real boss. His name was everywhere now, paired with phrases like biased behavior and public humiliation. The more he read, the more his stomach twisted into knots. He had been so certain of himself earlier, so confident that he was doing his job. Now all he felt was shame. A sharp knock at the door made him jump. "Come in," he croaked, his voice hoarse. The door opened and Molly stepped inside, her face tight with controlled anger. She held a folder in her hand and she didn't wait for permission to walk straight to his desk. "What's this?" Dunbar muttered, eyeing the folder suspiciously. "Your severance paperwork," Molly replied coldly. "Effective immediately." Dunbar paled, his mouth falling open. "What? You can't." "It's not my decision," Molly said, cutting him off. "Tina Reynolds gave the order directly. She said your actions don't align with the values this business represents, and we can't risk someone like you running this place." Dunbar slumped further in his chair, all the fight draining out of him. "I didn't know who she was." Molly's expression hardened. "That's not an excuse. You didn't treat her badly because she's the owner. You treated her badly because you made assumptions about her. That's the problem." Dunbar's face turned red, but he said nothing. The words hung in the air, cutting through the silence like a knife. Molly dropped the folder onto his desk. "I suggest you sign this and leave quietly before you embarrass yourself any further." She turned and walked out of the office without another word, leaving Dunbar alone with the crushing weight of his actions. Meanwhile, in one of the mall's private conference rooms, Tina sat across the table from her senior leadership team. Her demeanor was calm but resolute, her hands folded neatly in front of her as she listened to updates. Ethan, her right-hand man, stood beside her, holding a tablet that displayed the day's social media coverage. "The videos are everywhere," he said, swiping through the headlines. "People are applauding you for how you handled it. Most of the comments are positive." Tina nodded, though she looked less interested in the praise and more focused on what came next. "What about the employees? Are they okay?" Ethan smiled faintly. "Molly's been handling it. She made an announcement to the staff about Dunbar's termination and reassured them that we're doubling down on our training and values. They're relieved, I think. A lot of them were uncomfortable with how he ran things." "Good," Tina said firmly. "Make sure they know I'm proud of them. We have great people here and they deserve to feel respected and supported." Ethan nodded, jotting down a note. "And the public? How do you want to address all this attention?" Tina thought for a moment, her gaze distant. "We'll make a statement, but I don't want it to be about me. This isn't about getting credit, it's about making sure something like this doesn't happen again." She glanced down at her Kamala Harris shirt and smiled faintly. "People are always going to judge others based on appearances, but that doesn't mean we can't work to be better." "That's the message." Ethan grinned. "I'll draft something and run it by you. You know, you've started a bit of a movement here." Tina laughed softly, shaking her head. "It's not a movement. It's just common sense." Ethan smirked. "Well, common sense isn't so common." By the following day, the headlines had shifted. The video of Tina's confrontation with Mr. Dunbar continued to circulate, but the conversation had grown broader. Social media was flooded with posts about treating people with dignity, challenging biases, and speaking up when something was wrong. The story resonated with people far beyond the walls of the mall. At the same time, the mall itself saw an unexpected wave of positivity. Customers began sharing stories about how they had always felt welcome there, praising Tina's leadership and the inclusive environment she had built. A local news crew arrived to cover the story, catching shoppers on their way in and out. "It's inspiring," one woman said, holding a shopping bag. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't get angry, she just stood her ground and let her actions speak for her. "That's real power." Another customer, an older man, nodded thoughtfully. "People need to be reminded that appearances can be deceiving. You never know who you're talking to, so treat everyone with respect." Simple as that. Inside, the staff had a new sense of pride. Molly walked the halls with a clipboard, checking in with employees and answering their questions. For the first time in a long time, the atmosphere felt right. At the entrance of the mall, Tina stood quietly watching as families and shoppers flowed in and out. She wore the same Kamala Harris shirt, standing tall and unbothered by the curious glances from passers-by. Some recognized her and smiled, others whispered to one another, but Tina paid them no mind. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she pulled it out to find a text from Ethan. "Ethan, local paper wants a quote. What do you want me to say?" Tina smiled and typed a quick response. "Tell them this: respect isn't about who someone is. It's about who you are." She slipped the phone back into her pocket, her gaze returning to the flow of people entering the mall. There was still work to do, but for now Tina was content. She had shown the world that quiet strength could make a difference, that the most powerful messages didn't always need to be shouted. 2 weeks later, life at the mall had returned to normal, at least as normal as it could be after everything that had happened. The story had faded from the headlines, but its impact lingered. Tina's message had struck a chord, and the mall's reputation for fairness and inclusion had only grown stronger. Dunbar, on the other hand, had disappeared from public view. Rumors swirled about where he had ended up, but Tina didn't waste her time thinking about him. She knew that people like Dunbar had a choice: to learn and grow from their mistakes or to be left behind. That part wasn't up to her. One afternoon, as Tina walked through the mall, she noticed a young woman sitting on a bench near the food court. She was wearing a t-shirt with a bold political slogan, and for a split second, Tina felt the familiar weight of judgmental stares from other shoppers. The young woman looked nervous, glancing around as though expecting someone to confront her. Tina smiled to herself and walked over. "Nice shirt," she said warmly. The woman looked up, surprised. Then she smiled back, her shoulders relaxing. "Thanks." Tina nodded and continued on her way, her heart full. By the time Tina stepped outside into the warm afternoon sun, she felt lighter than she had in days. The world wasn't perfect, she knew that. But moments like this reminded her that change was possible, one small act at a time. She glanced back at the mall, its glass facade reflecting the light, and smiled. This was her place, her legacy. And as long as she was here, it would stand for something bigger than just shopping and commerce. It would stand for respect, dignity, and the quiet power of doing the right thing. No matter who you were, no matter what you wore. The following morning, the mall hummed with a sense of renewal. Employees walked with a lighter step, and shoppers seemed more aware of one another. Small smiles exchanged where judgment might have lingered before. Tina sat in her office, sipping a cup of coffee as sunlight filtered through the tall windows. She had a view of the central atrium where yesterday's drama had unfolded. It felt surreal to watch everything return to its familiar rhythm. But change, she knew, wasn't always a spectacle. It was often a series of quiet choices that rippled outward. There was a knock on her office door. Ethan poked his head inside, his usual grin in place. "You've got a visitor." Tina raised an eyebrow. "Who?" Ethan's grin widened. "The young woman you spoke to in the food court yesterday, the one with the political shirt. She said she wanted to talk to you." Curiosity flickered in Tina's eyes. "Let her in." Moments later, the young woman stepped inside, clutching a small notebook against her chest. She looked to be in her mid-20s, her posture slightly nervous but her eyes determined. Her t-shirt, still boldly proclaiming a political slogan, was paired with jeans and sneakers, simple, unassuming. "Hi," the young woman said shyly. "I'm Maya. I wanted to thank you." Tina set her coffee down, gesturing for Maya to sit. "For what?" "For what you did yesterday," Maya said, settling into the chair. "I saw the video. And then when you stopped to compliment my shirt, I don't know, it meant something." She paused, her voice soft. "I've always been afraid to speak up, to be seen." Tina leaned forward, studying her. "Why is that?" Maya hesitated, fiddling with the edge of her notebook. "I guess I've had too many experiences where people made me feel small. Like I didn't belong because of my opinions, my clothes, or just who I am." She looked up, her eyes bright with emotion. "But when I saw you stand up for yourself, for all of us, it made me feel like maybe it's okay to take up space. To be who I am." Tina smiled warmly, her chest swelling with pride. Maya, it's more than okay to take up space. It's necessary. The people who tell you to shrink, to disappear, they're the ones who are afraid. Afraid of difference. Afraid of change. But their fear isn't your responsibility. Maya nodded slowly, absorbing every word. I want to be like that, like you. Strong. Tina leaned back, her expression softening. You already are. Strength doesn't always look like standing in a crowd and speaking loudly. Sometimes it's as simple as showing up as yourself and not apologizing for it. Maya's face broke into a smile, her shoulders relaxing. Thank you, Ms. Reynolds. Call me Tina, she replied with a chuckle. And don't stop wearing that shirt. That afternoon, Tina made her rounds through the mall, something she hadn't done in a while. She liked walking the floor, seeing the stores bustling, employees chatting with customers, and kids laughing at the giant fountain in the center atrium. It reminded her why she loved this place, not as a business but as a community. As she passed one of the larger department stores, she noticed two custodians chatting near the entrance. One was an older man with graying hair and the other was younger, barely out of his teens. They straightened up quickly as Tina approached. Morning, she said with a smile. Morning, Ms. Reynolds, the older custodian replied respectfully. The younger one stared at her wide-eyed as though unsure whether to speak. Tina stopped, folding her arms. You two doing okay today? Yeah, just fine, the older man said, clearing his throat. The younger custodian blurted, We saw the video, ma'am. That was amazing. Tina chuckled. I'm glad you think so. But what did you take from it? The young man blinked, clearly caught off guard by the question. Well, I guess, I don't know. Just made me think. Like, you never know who someone really is. You shouldn't judge people just because of how they look. Exactly, Tina said, nodding. And not just because someone might turn out to be the boss. You treat people with respect because it's the right thing to do. The older custodian nodded sagely. A lesson more people need to learn. Tina smiled again. Keep up the good work. Both of you. As she walked away, she heard the younger custodian whisper, She's so cool. It made her grin. The day stretched into evening, and Tina found herself back in the atrium, watching the mall wind down. The fountain sprayed gently in the background, its soft trickle blending with the faint hum of closing announcements. Her phone buzzed. It was a call from Ethan. She answered it quickly. Hey, I just got a call from corporate, Ethan said, excitement in his voice. They want to recognize the mall for its commitment to inclusivity and respect. Apparently, customer feedback has been through the roof. Tina's eyebrows lifted in surprise. Already? Yeah. People love what you said, Tina. More importantly, they felt it. They're proud to shop here. Proud to be part of this community. Tina leaned against the railing, her gaze sweeping over the atrium. Shoppers headed for the exits, their arms full of bags, kids tugging playfully at their parents' hands. It wasn't just a mall, it was alive, and she had helped build that. That's good to hear, she said softly. But it's not about recognition. It's about making sure we stay this way. Ethan chuckled. I know. But still, it's a win. And you deserve it. Tina smiled faintly. Thanks, Ethan. All right, I'll let you go, he said. Enjoy the quiet. You earned it. Tina hung up and slipped the phone back into her pocket, savoring the stillness of the nearly empty space. She thought back to Mr. Dunbar's red face, his feeble protests, and how easily he had unraveled. He wasn't a villain, just another person who'd let his biases blind him. Everyone makes mistakes, she thought. It's what you do afterward that matters. Later that evening, as Tina left the mall and walked toward her car, she spotted a small family standing near the entrance. A little girl with curly hair tugged at her mother's arm, pointing at something behind her. Mommy, look, the girl said excitedly. It's her. The lady from the video. Tina smiled to herself, slowing her steps as the mother turned and caught her eye. Hi, the woman said warmly. I just wanted to say, thank you. For what you did. Tina paused, her smile widening. Thank you for saying that. The little girl grinned up at her. You're a superhero. Tina laughed softly, crouching down to meet the girl's eyes. You know what? You can be one too. Really? The girl asked, her eyes shining. Really? Tina replied. All it takes is treating people with kindness and standing up for what's right. The little girl beamed, and Tina gave her a quick wave as she stood and continued toward her car. The stars were beginning to blink to life in the evening sky, and the air carried the faint scent of rain. Tina climbed into the driver's seat, leaning back for a moment before starting the engine. She glanced at the mall in her rearview mirror, its lights still glowing brightly against the darkening sky. Quiet power, she whispered to herself, smiling. It always wins. The stars glimmered faintly above as Tina drove down the quiet streets toward her home. The hum of the engine filled the space, but her thoughts were elsewhere, lingering on the little girl's words earlier in the evening. You're a superhero. Tina smiled faintly, shaking her head. Superhero? Hardly. She was just someone who believed in fairness, someone who refused to let assumptions go unchecked. But maybe, just maybe, the little girl had a point. Superheroes didn't wear capes. They didn't always fight villains in masks. Sometimes they were just people who chose to do the right thing when it mattered most. As the house came into view, Tina parked in the driveway and sat for a moment, letting the stillness of the evening wash over her. The porch light was on, its soft glow a warm invitation. This was home, a far cry from the bustling energy of the mall, but a place where she could breathe, reflect, and recharge. The next morning, Tina awoke early to a string of messages on her phone. News outlets were still picking up the story, headlines praising her calm response and the powerful message she had delivered. As she sipped her coffee on the back porch, she scrolled through the comments on a viral video of the incident. This woman is a role model. We need more people like her in leadership. Handled with dignity and grace. A lesson for all of us. You never know who someone is, so treat everyone with respect. Bravo, Ms. Reynolds. Tina set the phone down, a thoughtful expression on her face. Public praise was nice, but she didn't want this to be just another viral story that disappeared in a few weeks. People love to share a headline, but real change? That required work, consistent, intentional effort. The sound of the doorbell broke her thoughts. She stood, smoothing her sweater as she walked to the door. When she opened it, she was surprised to find Molly standing there, a stack of folders in her arms. Molly, Tina said, smiling warmly. To what do I owe the visit? Molly grinned sheepishly, shifting the folders. I know it's your day off, but I thought you'd want to see this. She held up the top folder, labeled Mall Policy Updates. I worked with HR and the team yesterday. We're implementing new guidelines for staff training on respect, inclusivity, and bias awareness. I wanted your input before we roll it out. Tina's smile widened as she stepped aside. Come in. Let's take a look. An hour later, Molly sat across the table as Tina flipped through the new policy draft, nodding occasionally and adding small notes in the margins. This is good, Tina said finally, setting the papers down. Really good. It's simple, clear, and actionable. People need to understand that respect isn't optional. It's the foundation of everything we do. Molly nodded eagerly. Exactly. I think the staff will appreciate it. A lot of them were uncomfortable with the way Dunbar handled things, but they didn't know how to speak up. Tina's expression softened. It's not easy to speak up, especially when the person in charge makes you feel small. That's why leadership matters. It sets the tone for everyone else. Molly hesitated, then leaned forward. Can I ask you something? Of course. Why didn't you just tell Dunbar who you were from the beginning? You could have shut him down immediately. Tina smiled faintly, her gaze distant. Because that's not the point. If I'd said, I'm the owner, he would have treated me differently, but not because he respected me as a person. He would have respected my title. That's not what respect is about. Molly considered this, her expression thoughtful. So you let him reveal who he really was? Exactly, Tina replied. People show you who they are when they think you can't do anything about it. That's when you see their true character. Molly shook her head, a small smile playing at her lips. You're something else, Tina? Tina chuckled softly. I just hope we all learn something from it. Myself included. Over the next few weeks, the mall flourished under its new leadership culture. Staff training sessions were held, focusing on respect, inclusivity, and learning to challenge unconscious biases. Tina made a point to attend the first session herself, sitting quietly in the back of the room as the HR lead explained the importance of treating everyone with dignity. At one point during the presentation, the HR lead said, You never know someone's story. Everyone you meet is carrying experiences you can't see. Assume the best of people, and if you're proven wrong, still choose to treat them with respect. Tina smiled, her heart swelling with quiet pride. After the session, a young sales associate approached her nervously. Ms. Reynolds? Can I ask you something? Of course, Tina said warmly. The associate fidgeted with the hem of her shirt. Do you ever get tired of it? Of people judging you, I mean? Tina considered the question carefully. It's not easy, she admitted. But you know what's harder? Letting other people's opinions control who you are. That's a fight you'll never win. The associate nodded slowly, her shoulders relaxing. Thank you. I needed to hear that. Tina smiled. You're welcome. Just remember, your worth isn't up for debate. On a crisp Saturday morning, a month after the incident, Tina returned to the mall. This time she wore the same Kamala Harris shirt, paired with a tailored blazer. She walked the floors like she always did, greeting employees, chatting with shoppers, and watching as life moved effortlessly through the space she'd built. Near the fountain she spotted a familiar face, Maya, the young woman she'd spoken to weeks earlier. Maya was standing at a small table set up for voter registration, a confident smile on her face as she handed out forms and encouraged people to sign up. Tina approached quietly, her heart lifting at the sight. Maya? Maya looked up, her smile widening. Tina, I didn't expect to see you here. I like to check in from time to time, Tina said. She glanced at the table. Looks like you're taking up space after all. Maya grinned, her eyes sparkling. I guess I am. You inspired me, you know. If I want things to change, I have to be part of that change. Tina placed a hand on her shoulder, her voice soft but strong. You're doing exactly what you're meant to do, Maya. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Maya nodded, her confidence growing. I won't. As Tina stepped away, she felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. The mall was full of life, the energy brighter than ever. People of all ages, backgrounds, and beliefs moved through the space, coexisting as they always should. Tina paused near the entrance and looked back one last time. She saw the families, the kids laughing at the fountain, the employees working with purpose. And at the center of it all was her vision, alive, breathing, and thriving. Quiet power, she thought. It didn't roar. It didn't shout. But it changed everything. Tina adjusted her blazer, the bold Kamala Harris shirt peeking out beneath it, and stepped into the sunlight with a smile. The world wasn't perfect, but every choice mattered. Every action rippled outward. And sometimes one person standing up could inspire 1,000 more to do the same.